Hi, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is our first experience on AirMeet, and everything here is live, so bear with us as we go through this. My name is Stephanie Krishnan. I'm the IDC Manufacturing Insights Asia Pacific Research Director. I look after manufacturing, supply chain, and Industry 4.0 research for IDC in the region. Today, I'm here to talk about galvanizing supply chain change, and it's nice to have that roll of thunder in the background because it is a very dramatic topic. The time is indeed now. Today, we are going to go through and talk about the priorities and trends in the region. I'll be talking about a supply chain survey and a COVID-19 impact survey that we ran at IDC to give you some idea of some of the sentiment and what is happening in the region. And then we'll be talking about the action that is required with some of the IDC central guidance. Now, I'll just get straight into it. Today, we're looking at supply chains in transition, and supply chains have always been in transition. Here at IDC, we don't call it the new normal, and I cringe every time I hear that. We do refer to it as the next normal, and that's because change is constant. We are always changing. However, even though that change is constant, it's changing in ways that, have highlighted some of the weaknesses in our systems and have made us realize that we do actually need to shore up and become more resilient. So, with the current circumstances, rather than standing out in isolation and creating its own issues, what we're finding is that it is actually highlighting issues and bringing things into sharp focus. So here you can see that, things like the role of sustainability, which, rather than standing out in isolation is actually, coming to the fore and is becoming part of the other areas of the changes that are needed and the transition that is happening. And we could actually take a whole webinar by itself in terms of going through this topic. We look at the battle for talent, and the battle for talent, we've been talking about shortages in the supply chain industry with regards to talent, both in logistics and supply chain as well as digital talent, right? However, now this is now shifting from one where we're battling from talent is to one now we're protecting existing staff and looking for, being able to make sure that they're safe in their work environment. We have the integration and convergence of technology, and that's been an advantage. And organisations are recognising the value of having access to systems as remote work has increased in importance. So, cloud computing, remote learning and access. When we did our COVID-19 impact survey, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but in the May results, this was actually two of the key areas where organisations were, investing, manufacturing organisations in the region were investing. And then, of course, we have ensuring supply and dealing with the complexity of value chains. And these are obvious issues with rather complex solutions. Now this is quite obvious, but however, what we've been doing at IDC is we've been analysing how these priorities have been shifting, right? So where has the emphasis been changing with manufacturers and logistics companies and their supply chains across the region? So we have gathered priorities from a number of different survey sources. We looked at our Industry 4.0 survey, our supply chain survey, and we did a COVID-19 communication sentiment analysis, which looks at the communication sent out by companies with regards to COVID and their actions related to that. And we also looked at our COVID-19 impact survey. Now, a COVID-19 impact survey is a survey that IDC has been running every 2 to 3 weeks since March. And we get a time series of data seeing how sentiment is actually changing. Now, all of these surveys have, supply chain perspectives in them, and they're looking at it from both the manufacturer and the logistics service provider's perspective. Now, what we've noticed is there has been a shift in priorities of manufacturers and the supply chain partners over the last 6 months. The first two, which I'll highlight, are the top two. So looking at competitive survival and profitability, which is all about business continuity. And this speaks to the elements of survival that will enable industrial business continuity. And this is quite an obvious shift in priority that we expect. The other obvious one is the operational resiliency, where we're looking at, how are we going to be resilient moving into the future? As organisations survive, there is a need to keep up with the capabilities developed by the competition. So, competition is taking their own actions to ensure their own survival, and that's going to create new opportunities for competitive advantage and competition in the industry. But there's also the need to ensure intercompany integration to address the complexity. There's the need to build in agility and deal with external forces such as rising nationalism, competition, the need to evaluate new markets, looking at customer segments and innovation within these priorities. So these are at the core of this operational resiliency section. Now, what may be less obvious is the emphasis that's coming up around the people, planet and profit, the triple bottom line. Organisations are seeing that initiatives that support people and planet are less about greenwashing and marketing. And one of the discussions that we had yesterday on the first day of LogiSYM Vietnam was about, how sustainability is often perceived to be just a marketing exercise. However, what we're seeing is in the supply chain survey that organisations were more tied to sustainability as a way to mitigate risk. So looking at resource efficiency, being able to ensure the safety of employees, and this is increasing company performance. Collaborative ecosystems, ecosystems have really come to the fore, and this is necessary to ensure resiliency and drive innovation as organisations realise that they must operate as a supply chain and not just as an individual company. The ability to innovate and be agile becomes stronger as companies do this. We're also seeing greater efforts of philanthropy, so we're looking at care for customers and care for suppliers, and care for employees to ensure that there are the ongoing resources necessary to meet the demand post the crisis. Now, I think, IDC has been talking about this recovery curve for the last 6 to 8 months. And so for those that have heard this with me, please bear with me. I do have new data to share with you regarding this. So for those that haven't seen this curve, the way we look at this is that there is an economic situation across the bottom here, and I think that's quite clear in terms of, where organisations expect to be in from an economic sense, right? The business situation at the top highlights the phases of recovery that organisations are going through. So at the beginning, there is a strong focus on business continuity planning. There is a focus on meeting financial obligations and targets for the current financial year or quarter. And most organisations are beyond this initial reaction. As they move to a cost optimization focus, seeing recessions on the horizon, organisations are trying to get their house in order to increase resiliency to weather the oncoming storm. As we move out of recessionary stages, organisations are looking to make targeted investments. It becomes the key to generating growth for businesses and building a foundation for the next stage to accelerate and compete. And in the next normal, which IDC calls the future enterprise, this is where digitally enabled outcomes are the standard for industry supply chains. Now, as I mentioned, IDC does do a survey every 2 to 3 weeks, and we call it the COVID-19 IT Impact Survey. In this survey, we look at Asia-Pacific manufacturers and where they think they are on this particular curve. Now, here we have results from June, July, August, and October. And I've just done a bit of a scribble over the top so that you can see where the trends are. Organisations did think that they were on a road to recovery. However, we are seeing that being pulled back as we are seeing the impact of, second, third, and fourth waves on Asia-Pacific manufacturers. And we are seeing, demand and supply waves, and shocks being felt as they come through the region. So organisations aren't out of the, in Asia-Pac, manufacturers and their supply chains are not out of the bad weather yet. There is a feeling that we are going to be battening down the hatches, so to speak. However, as you can see, there are some organisations that are feeling that they are returning to growth and heading towards the next normal, which means that they are investing in capabilities that are going to drive greater supply chain ability, so being able to actually drive major changes in their supply chain and put them ahead of the competition. So what does that actually look like? So IDC sees that the major changes that have been triggered with manufacturing and that has impact for supply chains, distribution channels, and the logistics providers are in these 5 areas. Organisations are starting to see focus in areas such as modernising remote work capabilities. This is looking at working from home, including remote work. We're seeing solutions come in for augmented reality, for example, and there have been some steps recently where organizations do have key equipment on their site, be it conveyor belts for a warehouse or production lines for a manufacturing organization, where normally they would have on-site servicing or on-site access to engineers. And if those engineers do need to fly in from overseas, that's been restricted at the moment. So we're seeing, there's one company that has put together a augmented reality solution that allows the engineer to dial in from overseas, which is, of course, while there's the investment in the augmented reality, it's actually saving companies in terms of travel and transportation costs, travel and accommodation costs. So, these remote work capabilities is starts with things like using Teams and meeting in webinars like this, having systems that enable access to data remotely, but do actually get into some quite sophisticated capabilities. The next is centralizing the monitoring and diagnostics of operations and assets. And then we see this with regards to use of control towers and having that on a cloud-enabled platform so that organizations can actually access their data from anywhere. But we're also seeing this in terms of companies trying to use everything from security cameras to Internet of Things to do things like help monitor conveyors and enable safe distancing with personnel. So there's quite a number of opportunities that are happening in this space. With regards to process automation, there is the physical process automation. So we are seeing a push for service robots that are assisting in warehousing and manufacturing sites. The other area is in areas like robotic process automation, where organizations are seeking to synchronize old or legacy systems that may not have cloud capabilities, to be able to synchronize those with cloud-enabled systems so that they're able to have remote access by customers, remote access by suppliers, being able to look at automating alerts that are being sent out in case staff are all of a sudden not able to access their computers, etc. So there is there's a lot of interest in this manual process automation, and in ASEAN, this is an area that we've seen particularly flare up. Remote product service is a key part of product innovation. Now, this is an interesting one. This is where we're seeing Internet of Things technologies being embedded into capabilities such as production lines, in conveyors, so that even air conditioners, right, for consumers. Now, why is this of interest to logistics personnel or supply chain personnel? It's because what is happening is, if you can imagine your air conditioner is going bust, what would normally happen? You would have a technician come out, he would look at it, he'd say, oh, you've got a broken widget, because you can tell I know a lot about air conditioning repair. So you would have a broken widget and we need to order the part. And so then they would order the part, or they go back to the head office and get the part, and then they would come back out. Now, with embedding technology in these sort of devices, be it, whether it's an air conditioner or a production line, the item can self-diagnose, so it can actually send out an alert when this is going to fail, and inventory can be positioned ready so that when the technician comes out, you can actually have the technician call you and tell you that the unit is about to fail, or when they do come out, that they do have the part ready, right? So you don't have to have double journeys, you're reducing cost of service, etc. So this is quite an interesting innovation area, and we're seeing increased interest in this. Also, supply chain resiliency, probably what would seem like an obvious one, but probably one of the more challenging ones, is it means that we need to build connections between our organizations in the supply chain. We need to build in visibility and agility to improve the reaction time and the capabilities of the supply chains. So what does this mean? It means that we need to think about rethink about the role of technology and how we're going to use this in the next normal. Right? Whether we think about how we service our customers and consumers, and IDC uses this model to break it down into the 9 areas that we've identified. But whether we're looking at how organizations connect, how systems connect, whether we're looking at the future of operations, which is where a lot of the supply chain and logistics capabilities play for us, whether we're looking at new business models in the future of industries. Organizations are having to rethink the role of technology and how it's going to support what we need to do to move forward to return to some sort of normal. Now, talking about this, a lot of people think, oh yeah, that's the purview of multinationals. They're the only ones that are interested in this. I was in a conversation again yesterday in LogiSYM in day one, where I was talking to a Vietnamese gentleman, and he was saying that Vietnamese companies were not thinking about this sort of technology and automation 3 to 4 years ago. but today are exploring things like augmented reality and automation for systems. So this is not something that has been, just the purview of MNCs or Western or more developed nations. This is something that is happening everywhere as emerging nations and developing nations are seeking to leapfrog some of the capabilities that have been put in by developed nations. So this is not just something for multinationals, it's something for everyone. And actually, over the next few slides, I'll be showing you that smaller companies actually stand to gain the most. Now, this is our supply chain survey, and I'm going to go through the IDC 2020 supply chain survey results. It was a global survey that was run, and we had a portion of data that came out of Asia Pacific. And I'm largely going to talk about the ASEAN numbers as we are in talking about it in a Vietnam or ASEAN context, right? What we asked the manufacturers to do is identify gaps in their supply chain, right? The first one that they identified was the lack of digital competencies, which is limiting organizations. And there does need to be an emphasis for organizations to develop these digital competencies. We're seeing encouraging things where centers of excellence are being built in the middle of warehouses, so employees can see these technologies firsthand and then get curious and interested and develop their own interest in being involved in pilot projects, etc. We're seeing digital learning come in place. We're seeing formal learning. We're seeing a number of different areas where organizations are starting to beef up these capabilities. When we're looking at sufficient collaboration with external suppliers or customers, this is a gap that needs to be addressed in that without that collaboration, we are seeing that supply chains that are able to collaborate are actually going ahead and being able to be more profitable and meet more agile in terms of their reaction to disruptions. So that lack of collaboration has actually hurt some supply chains where they've been unable to do that, and it has resulted in breaks in supply, lack of visibility through their supply, being unable to get components in order to move inventory, etc. And the last one is the lack of supply chain visibility, and that has, again, is a result of the lack of collaboration. Has resulted in the inability to take action. The key drivers here is that organizations are looking to seek the velocity of product development and time to market, and being able to have that flexibility with the visibility with a supply chain partners and being able to collaborate is going to enable that. Now, in terms of being able, there are gaps in the supply chain, but obviously those gaps need to be addressed. So organizations then need to drive change. And in terms of putting an importance on the areas that are driving change in Asia Pacific supply chains, and in this case, it's the ASEAN numbers, we're now seeing a shift in how the supply chain is being viewed. The supply chain is now seen as a strategic tool for business performance and growth, as well as for building up resilience for companies. Digital technology is the top driver of change for ASEAN supply chains, reflecting the potential for driving digital transformation, as well as the lack of full clarity into its potential. So organizations are struggling with how they're going to adapt that new technology, but they do see that as an important area of how they're going to actually move forward. In our survey, we also saw that organizations saw that cloud and software as a service, cloud-enabled applications are actually becoming the default choice in terms of how they're going to do this. It has a lot to do with the reduction of costs, so that they're not buying, servers and investing in capital in order to put a server and infrastructure into their own organizations. They're just subscribing to a service and doing some training and some configuration, and they're able to turn that on in less. In some cases it can be 3 months. In most cases it's less than a year. So this is a key area where organizations are actually seeing that they're able to improve their organization, improve their supply chain. In our 2020 survey, we saw that more than 3/4 of Asia-Pac respondents believe that these are, cloud and SaaS are very important to their supply chain today, and they believe that it's going to increase to more than 80%. And more than 80% see this as important for their supply chain in 2 to 3 years' time. Now, in terms of risk mitigation, obviously we are dealing with a lot of risk, and there is an emphasis on visibility, on being able to see sources, and also being able to deal with sustainability. Now, I'm going to talk more about the visibility shortly. However, I want to take a minute to highlight the sustainability focus here. You can see here that for RCM manufacturers, sustainability was the second highest area of focus for risk mitigation. Now, the overall supply chain visibility and the direct materials, finished goods sourcing are quite obvious, right? However, we found that organizations are seeing that sustainability is a way to, improve resource efficiency and drive effectiveness in their organization. In a recent analysis that we did at IDC, we found that these manufacturers that combine digital technologies with sustainability initiatives actually have higher levels of revenue and higher levels of profitability, right, compared to those that don't. In the same analysis, we also asked whether Asia Pacific or ASEAN manufacturers are willing to change or adopt their business models to deal with this, and a large number of them are actually seeking to do so. So we're seeing that, sustainability, digital transformation, there are new business models being adopted, which is actually driving the leaders forward, and there could actually be lagging financial performance for those that don't embrace this. This is coming more and more. This is coming through more and more, especially as COVID has bitten quite hard. And in particular, we are hearing this from the logistics service providers as well as the supply chain community. So it is an interesting angle that we are seeing for a focus of risk mitigation. Now, I said I'd come back to the supply chain visibility and responsiveness, and I think we've seen this model on the right here, the traditional model, for a number of years. But recent times has demonstrated the true value of having a digitally enabled supply chain, and probably the first time in history that we've had this capability, really had it, even though we've been talking about it for decades. So whether it be manual information about transactions, confirmations, updates, financial flows, data about market conditions or social reactions, it's been manual so far, right? Largely, in the late 90s and early noughties. Now we're seeing a truly digital supply chain, and it has a fully automated feedback loop, taking advantage of cloud capabilities, big data, artificial intelligence, throw every technical term you can think of there. And organizations are actually starting to implement this to ensure connectedness, to make sure that they're able to make data-driven decisions, and that they're able to make those quickly and deliver on that, agile, responsive supply chain. So, with this, we see the top two on the left. You can see the top two areas of focus are on supply chain planning and on the end-to-end supply chain. Where we would normally, in the end-to-end supply chain is actually quite interesting in that there is a degree of focus with regards to tier one suppliers, but going beyond tier one is normally considered to be like non-strategic, right? However, with recent times, we've seen the impact that non-strategic can actually have on the manufacturing process and the resulting supply chain. So, integrating this data is allowing for better supply chain planning, calling into the focus for, the need for integrated S&OP, or beyond Excel forecasting and demand sensing. We need to link this to the factory, to the warehouse. That's where the magic happens, right? To ensure that all the information necessary to achieve the best outcomes for customers. We need to make sure that those outcomes are driven, and that data provides inputs for scheduling, for prioritization, or any other myriad decisions that need to be made on the floor. So we really are seeing that push to drive that visibility, and we're seeing organizations adapt technologies to do so. Now, why I said before that, there is an emphasis not just on making this happen for MNCs, but we're also seeing this happen for smaller organizations. Now, one of the questions that we asked was, how likely is it that a competitor could gain a competitive advantage in your industry? And organizations came back and said that they believe that, 76% of organizations believe that a digitally native competitor will disrupt their industry within 5 years. 85% believe that a current competitor who becomes, who digitally transforms will actually disrupt their industry within the next 5 years. So, what we are seeing is that it's not just the purview of the MNCs, although, majority think that there will be a competitor that does adopt digital technology that will actually disrupt their industry, However, there's also a strong portion that this is going to come from some digitally native or agile startup that is going to come in and have, an effect on the industry. And it may not necessarily be that they take over the industry. They could introduce a technology that changes the industry. So these are some of the things to keep in mind, is that, it's not just your current competitors that you need to think about. It's the ones that are coming down the road in terms of the technology that they're able to develop. So bringing this back to the first slide, we talked about the 5 different areas that, we're seeing impact around, modern work capabilities, remote monitoring and diagnostics, heavy investment in process automation, remote product servicing, and resilient supply chain capabilities. And some of the areas that we're seeing investment in at the moment is around, is illustrated on this slide. And I'm not going to go through them all, but I will call out a couple. One is around artificial intelligence for decision support. And looking at analytics and decision support capabilities is one of the areas that organizations are seeking to do, because we do have a lot of we do have a large amount of data that's actually coming in from supply chain transactions and from devices and vehicles and what have you. And being actually able to utilize that data is very difficult as a human being. Being able to put that into algorithms and apply machine learning that is inherent in a lot of the platforms that we use today is very useful. Being able to do things like put in RPA, robotic process information from manual operations, is also becoming something that organizations are seeking to do. And taking advantage of robots or bringing together ecosystems and networks to be able to collaborate across our supply chains. So I'm almost at time, so I'll just finish with the last essential guidance. Do look beyond, look at modernizing. Do embrace the collaboration and remote capabilities, because you may be able to take advantage of remote workers that are not necessarily, they might not necessarily be in your office. They may not necessarily be in your country. And if you're not trying to take advantage of this, your competitors will be. Look at integrating beyond tier 1 suppliers to try and get that visibility for your supply chain. Develop those relationships, rethink planning. Spreadsheets, manual, it's not cutting it anymore, and we've seen the impact of that. Having real-time access to data and starting to automate some of those processes is key. Look at new market entrants. They could be introducing some interesting technologies that could be an opportunity or threaten your industry. Look at, if you don't know what to do, talk to vendors. Vendors are there to assist with strategy and technology alignment and can talk to you about not just the capabilities that you have to buy from them, but also what they are, interested in, what they need to integrate with their capabilities so that you're able to get the best out of their software. And my last thought here is, don't just digitalize. If you're going to replace workers with digital capability, it's a zero-sum game. The digitalization is going to enable you to do more, right? It's not just about replacing a worker. It's actually getting that worker to be able to scale and do more and offer more. Make sure that you're looking to do that, because that's where you'll get the real value out of digitalization, and do it now. Thank you very much for your time today. If you have any questions, put them in the box and I'll be sure to answer them when I can. But I think we've got Kyle next, and I'll let him have the floor. Thank you.